picture your electric meter spinning all summer while your AC fights a losing battle against the heat pouring through your ceiling. Now picture a house with no AC unit at all, no outdoor condenser, no refrigerant lines running through the walls, no compressor cycling on and off every 8 minutes, and that house sitting at a comfortable 65 degrees on a day when it's 98 outside. Not a cabin in the mountains. A regular house, on a regular lot, with a $300 pipe buried under the backyard. That pipe exists. People are living in homes that use it right now, and the reason it hasn't shown up in any contractor's quote you've ever received has nothing to do with whether it works, and everything to do with who loses money when it spreads. Let's start underground, because that's where the whole thing makes sense. Dig a hole 4 feet deep in your backyard and stick a thermometer in the wall of that hole. Do it in the middle of July. Do it again in February. The number you get back will be somewhere between 50 and 58 degrees Fahrenheit, and it barely budges between those two readings no matter what the weather is doing above your head. That's not a quirk of your particular yard. It's a consistent, measurable property of soil depth that's been documented across dozens of climates on multiple continents. Most people stop there and call it thermal mass, which is accurate but incomplete. The more interesting explanation is what physicists call thermal diffusivity, essentially a measurement of how quickly temperature changes travel through a material. For moist soil, that rate is slow enough that the heat from a summer at the surface takes several months to migrate down to 4 feet of depth. By the time that warmth actually arrives underground, the season above has already flipped. The soil at pipe depth is perpetually running half a year behind whatever's happening at the surface. That's not a poetic description, it's the actual measured physics of how heat moves through dirt. What that means in practice is genuinely strange when you first think it through. The cool ground your buried pipe is sitting in during July isn't some neutral baseline temperature. It's last winter's cold, still held in the soil, waiting. The heat your yard absorbed this summer is already on its way down, but it won't arrive at pipe depth until sometime around Christmas. So your system draws on stored winter cold in summer, and the stored summer warmth shows up just in time to take the edge off January. The Earth is doing the timing for you automatically, for free, forever. A research facility in southern Ontario put real numbers on this. 9 earth tubes, each buried about 6 feet down and running 65 feet in length. They monitored continuously across 8 full summers. Air entering the pipes on hot July afternoons came out the other end 31 degrees cooler. Not approximately, consistently, season after season, with zero mechanical assistance beyond the fan moving the air. The system actually performed slightly better in its second and third summers than its first, as the surrounding soil settled into a stable thermal relationship with the pipe. After that, performance plateaued and held. No degradation, no maintenance cycle, no replacement schedule. An air conditioner starts losing efficiency the moment it leaves the factory. A buried pipe trends the opposite direction. The Amish in Holmes County, Ohio have understood this for a long time, though they wouldn't describe it using any of that language. Walk into one of those old farmhouses on a brutal August afternoon, and the temperature inside stops you. It's cool in a way that feels almost out of place, and there's no machine responsible for it. One farmer summed it up the way someone describes something so obvious it barely needs explaining. He called the ground the cooler. He wasn't being poetic. There's a clay pipe running under his property that's been tempering air into his home for generations. That knowledge didn't originate in Ohio. A German architect documented underground air channeling tunnels built into the stone foundations of rural farmhouses in the Rhine Valley in 1897, noting that some of those systems had been continuously functioning since the early 1700s. When German-speaking settlers moved to Pennsylvania in the 1700s, they brought that building knowledge with them. The Pennsylvania Amish are the direct descendants of those settlers, and the practice never died in their communities because they never had a reason to abandon something that required no fuel and needed almost no upkeep. The American government actually documented all of this in plain language. In 1947, the USDA published a farming bulletin, document 1918, titled ventilation of farm buildings that included a dedicated section on underground air intake systems, burial depth, pipe dimensions, drainage slope, intake positioning, all of it written out in practical terms for farmers to build themselves. That document stopped appearing in building guides somewhere around 1960. The timing is worth sitting with for a moment. Between 1950 and 1970, natural gas pipelines reached essentially every small town across the American Midwest. Gas furnaces became the standard residential heating solution almost overnight. Central forced air cooling followed through the 1960s as electric utilities looked to grow their summer revenue. Every technology in that rollout had an industry behind it. Manufacturers, installers, trade associations, lobbyists working to get their product written into building code as the accepted solution. The earth tube had none of that. No one was selling it. No one was profiting from it. So no one fought to keep it in the manual. The disappearance wasn't accidental, and in more recent years it's become something more deliberate. Planning documents from the American Gas Association that surfaced through investigative reporting in 2020 identified passive thermal systems as a direct threat to natural gas revenue in residential buildings. What followed was a coordinated legislative push through more than 24 state legislatures, bills written to prevent local governments from classifying, permitting, or incentivizing passive alternatives to conventional heating and cooling equipment. Researchers who compared the text of those bills across Utah, Texas, Arizona, and Louisiana found the language nearly word for word identical. When a Utah legislator was asked who drafted the bill he introduced, he said he learned about it from his gas supplier. The financial logic is straightforward. Heating and cooling equipment in the U.S. generates well over $200 billion annually when you count the hardware sales, the installation, the service contracts, the refrigerant, and the utility revenue tied to running it all. A pipe buried in your yard for $300 in materials cuts every one of those revenue streams simultaneously. There's nothing to service, nothing to replace on a regular cycle, nothing to refill, and nothing drawing meaningful power from the grid. The industry didn't need a secret meeting to decide this was a problem. The math made the conclusion obvious. Now, there is one legitimate technical objection to earth tubes that gets raised constantly, and the cooling industry has done an excellent job making sure it's the first thing anyone hears. The mold argument. Warm, humid air enters a cool pipe, water vapor hits the cooler pipe wall and condenses, that moisture collects at low points, and biological growth follows. In a system built without drainage in mind, every part of that sequence is real and it does happen. But the solution has been known since before anyone was publishing research papers on it. The pipe has to run on a continuous downward slope from the house connection toward the outdoor intake. No dips, no flat sections, no low points where water can sit. About an inch of drop per 10 feet of pipe length is all it takes, which works out to a grade you'd barely notice visually. Any condensation that forms drains out on its own before it can accumulate. The European Passive House Institute tracked properly built systems across 5 years and multiple climates. At the end of that study, air quality readings from the pipe outlets were essentially identical to outdoor ambient air. No elevated biological activity, clean air. The mold problem is a construction error, not an inherent flaw in the technology. Build the slope in, and the objection disappears with the condensate. So let's talk about what this actually costs, because the number is almost uncomfortable given what you're replacing. 40 feet of 8-inch smoothbore PVC runs somewhere between $60 and $90. A screened outdoor intake cap is around $12. An inline duct fan, which is the only component that draws any power at all, roughly equivalent to a single light bulb, costs $40 to $70. A small drain trap at the low end of the pipe is another $8. Couplings and primer get you to roughly $250 in total materials. A half-day rental on a walk-behind trencher from any equipment yard is around $120, and it'll cut your 40-foot trench 4 feet deep in a couple of hours. The connection to your existing ductwork is straightforward if your home has central air. An opening in the cold air return duct, a flanged pipe end, and a bead of mastic sealant. Your existing blower does the work of pulling tempered air through the system. If you're running window units instead, the tube feeds a dedicated register, and your compressor only has to handle whatever gap remains between the earth-tempered air and your target temperature, which is often just a few degrees. Runtime drops significantly, so does the bill. No permit required in most states, because passive ventilation systems don't fall under heating and cooling equipment classifications. That regulatory gap exists because nobody writing those preemption bills genuinely anticipated that homeowners would start digging their own trenches. One weekend of work, no license, no ongoing cost, a system that improves slightly over its first few seasons and then runs without meaningful maintenance for as long as the pipe holds together, which is typically measured in decades. 30 years from now, your neighbor will have replaced their AC unit at least twice, spent somewhere in the range of $20,000 to $30,000 on equipment and electricity, and will be explaining to a technician why the refrigerant keeps leaking. You'll be explaining to whoever asks why your house is cool in July and you haven't had a utility bill worth complaining about since you spent a weekend with a rented trencher and $150 in PVC. The ground solved this problem before your grandparents were born. The government wrote it down in 1947. The Amish never stopped using it. The only thing keeping it out of your house is the same thing that's always kept it out, an industry that needs you to not know it exists. Now you do.